say. Firstly, I would like to say thank you very, very much to Sergeant Major Williams for coming up here and sharing a bit of history with us. Sergeant Major Williams stands for a legacy in the United States that is becoming less and less pronounced. As less and less people join the active duty military, these threads of service and transition and sacrifice more and more tend to be lost along the wayside. So before I start with my formal comments, I just wanted to take a moment, not just to say thank you to Sergeant Major Williams, but also to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas for taking his time today. Thank you. It's always hard for me to hear accolades or hear my own bio. It's really easy to look at the bullet points that are positive and be proud. But what people don't get to see about me are the times that I'm not so proud, the times that I struggle, the many times that I failed on the road to stand before you today. And it's with that sense of continuing my service and also hopefully upholding the legacy of those that have come before me that I say today to you, there's a very real power to your story, just as much as there is to mine. And when I share my story with you today, it's with this mentality that you will be inspired by it to tell and say your own story, that you'll walk forward into the world and realize that you have something to offer, something to give others, and that your unique insights are truly valuable. So without further ado, I'm going to go to my actual speech. I'd like to take a moment first to thank Maureen Elias, the BSU Student Veterans Association, and the entire Bowie State University staff. Your team has put together an amazing event honoring veterans, and I am also honored to be your keynote speaker. Veterans, thank you for your service, and happy Veterans Day. My name is Wyle Gray. I'm the founder of Veterans of War, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving and sharing veteran stories. This Veterans Day, I'd like to talk to you about the power of a single story. Storytelling has been an essential means of passing information in our species since the invention of language. Stories have the power to teach, to pass information not personally gained, to broaden our mental and emotional horizons. They allow us to fundamentally connect with others. I'd like to tell you a bit about my story, and in doing so, encourage you to think about your own journey and how your trials, your experiences, and your struggles may have value to those that hear them. We all have choices. We all have trauma. What we do with that energy, whether we choose to grow or to shrink away from it, says a lot about our character. I share these stories with you for another reason as well, so that you may know that what your service members do, what we do every day to ensure that our American way of life continues, that freedom, democracy, and access to information remain sacrosanct. It is my firm belief that an informed populace is a powerful populace. In that vein, just as the head should know where the hands are, so too should the people know where they've sent their military. The sad truth is that military service is at an all-time low, with less than 1% of the entire population actively joining the military. With service as the guiding principle, I'll tell you guys the following. I've lived a life marked by trauma, starting from my earliest memories. Just giving you the bullet points should paint for you a relatively clear picture. I was a foster kid. My family was torn apart when I was 10 by the government system. I was taken from my mother for sexual abuse, malnutrition, and abandonment. I bounced from group home to foster home until I was adopted at 14. Finding and defining family became a very important aspect of my life. The military was a way out of a life that seemed to be beyond my control, and hopefully into a better one. It was the only chance I saw to go to college and to really change the circumstances that had plagued my family. I was 18. I was scrawny. I was the same height I am now, but then I was maybe $140 soaking wet. I didn't look like I could fight my way out of a wet paper bag. Despite that fact, I did have one thing going for me. I had scored pretty well on the entrance exam, on the ASVAB. So after visiting recruiters for the Army and the Navy, I realized that I had a little bit of power to play with. They offered me incentives to join, like money to pad my pockets or potential duty station preferences. Then I visited the Marines. Inside, barely contained by his desk, sat an old, lantern-jawed gunnery sergeant. He was enormous and had the proportions of the classic bulldog. When I came in, he didn't even look at me. He barked his first question, "What do you want?" As I stammered my reply, my voice broke. Well, the Army offered me incentives such as, "Get the hell out of my office." Terrified, I left. But one thing you'll learn about me is that I'm persistent. I came back the very next day. He must have had cartoon dollar signs in his eyes when he offered me purpose, pride, growth, and leadership. I signed up immediately. I was in the Marines for over 8 years, from June 2000 until December 2008. In that time, I served with some of the greatest people that I've ever met. I traveled to more than 30 countries, spanning 5 continents. First as an ammunition technician, then as a Marine security guard, and finally as the ammunition chief for an artillery battery. It was there in my final deployment that cracks began to form. We've got an unidentified vehicle approaching the West Gate. As the Quick Response Force, or the QRF, formed up, I found myself sitting with the Marines in Guard Tower 2, overlooking the main gate to Forward Operating Base Delta in Helmand Province. Our unit was just 50 clicks from the border to South Waziristan. We were in Taliban country. And it was the Spring Offensive, late 2008. The speeding Toyota, like every other white pickup in the area, looked as though it had been salvaged from a quarry. It was dented and covered in pock marks in its paint. It all combined into a very unique camo pattern, distinct to enemy vehicles in the southern Afghanistan region. Marines do not take proximity threats lightly. So true to their name, the QRF stacked 4 men deep on the main gate. I dismounted the tower. There was a sense of dread as women started pouring out of the cab. Their wails were frantic, piercing through the fog of heat and ringing in our ears. As they ripped the blue tarp from the bed of the truck, it revealed a horrific sight. So very much blood, covering tiny, silent shapes. Small, fragile, and very destroyed little people. Apparently, a group of Afghani children had stumbled upon an unexploded 40mm high explosive round. We call that unexploded ordnance, or UXO, but that's just a fancy acronym for a fat, deadly bomb. They unearthed it in a field near their farm. They probably made a game of taking it back to their hut. They probably laughed as they shut the wicker door and sat on the hand-woven rug that made up the entirety of their possessions on this planet. A sudden, deafening explosion stopped their laughter forever. After several months in Afghanistan, I started to feel disconnected. As the confirmed kill count for my unit steadily increased, and I saw our tents decorated with the tally of the dead, I began having trouble sleeping. As the ammunition chief for an artillery battery in constant combat operations, I personally handled every single round that went down range for my unit. Thousands in total. Thousands of 155mm high explosive rounds with a kill radius of a football field dropped on villages made of tiny little mud huts, just like the one from before. For me, something didn't add up. I couldn't understand why we were even in Afghanistan. These people weren't our enemies, they were just farmers. You see, that was the hard part. The hard part was actually finding our enemies, because they lived within the people we were trying to protect. Not knowing who the enemy was left you in a state of constant vigilance. I have recurring nightmares of a patrol that I went on through the city of Darvasham and the Darvasham district of southern Helmand Valley towards the end of my deployment. Our commanding officer decided on his own to conduct a presence patrol in the city. This annoyed the staff because we saw it as an unnecessary endangerment of our men. There was no strategic objective to be met. However, if the CO was going, that meant that everybody was going, so we suited up. I pulled the flak over my head, scraping my sunburned nose bloody for the 100th time. As I pushed my head into the little hole left into the 50-pound armor, my ammo and grenades settled onto my torso. There was always a moment where I felt like I was suffocating when I put my body armor on. I waited a moment to let that pass. Once we all had our kit, our group lined up at the rear gate, night vision goggles affixed, gloves, and eye protection ready to rock. I was tasked with right side column rear security. Rear security for the other side of the road went to a senior sergeant named Sabula. The patrol snaked through the bazaar without incident for the first 20 minutes. As we continued further into the winding village, our lines naturally spread out and condensed at intersections like a spring. When the spring condensed enough, it would take a few minutes before regular motion would begin again. It was during one of the final pauses before heading back to the safety of our forward encampment that Sabula noticed a vehicle approaching from the rear. The moped had a driver and a passenger seated behind him, arms clasped about the driver's waist. They were in traditional garb, a long earthen robe covering their bodies, and a turban covering their heads. Muscle memory kicked in, and years of training took over, as I found myself completely exposed and without my bidding, moving into the center of the street. "Udrega!" I yelled frantically, holding my M4 upright with my dominant hand and extending my non-dominant hand in the international signal to stop. "Udrega! Udrega!" Stop! Stop! I yelled frantically in the native dialect of the region, yet the moped continued to advance. 200 meters. I can feel my heart beating in my chest. 175 meters. I dropped to kneeling. 150 meters. I moved my weapon from the safe position to fire. 125 meters. I stand, I outstretch my hand, and I yell frantically a final time, pleading with everything inside me for the driver to stop. 100 meters. My trigger finger starts to itch as I silently recount the 4 weapon safety conditions to myself. Treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Never point a weapon at anything you do not intend to shoot. Keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Keep your weapon on safe until you're prepared to fire. At 75 meters, I'd gone through all my safety conditions. As I slowly settled back into a firing position, I saw the whites of the driver's eyes widen, like a horse startled by lightning. He'd finally seen me. The Afghani swerved hard, nearly toppling the passenger at his back in his attempt to turn around. Once the dust had settled, the moped and its passenger faded into the distance away from our platoon. I moved back into the cover on the right side of the road, my heart beating. I'd almost killed the guy. I'd done it mechanically. I hadn't even thought about it. The blood pounded hot and deafening in my ears as the adrenaline coursed through my veins. As I knelt in the sparse, dry grass near the road, my hands started to shake. I almost killed the guy. I replay that incident several times a month in nightmares. Nowadays, my wife rubs my back to help me sleep when she hears my breath start to go ragged. Once the nightmares started, I realized it was time for change. So after 8.5 years and several promotions, I got out. It remains one of the most difficult decisions that I've ever made. Losing my identity as an active Marine, losing the only support structure of any real significance or substance in my life, was devastating for me. The changes in me were subtle, but pervasive. I found myself increasingly withdrawn, isolated, and overwhelmed with dark thoughts, followed by even darker emotions. My first marriage failed. I had trouble connecting with my old friends, and my family could barely recognize me. In a lot of ways, I never left Afghanistan. It would take years before I gained or regained any real sense of normalcy. For much of that time, I felt utterly alone. I wonder if I even would have been able to crawl out of that dark place without help. Luckily, in early 2013, I met somebody that would change everything. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Weber. When I met Mark, working with a group of veterans in service to their community, repainting a community common area of a shelter, I was seriously contemplating suicide. In my mind, I had nothing tying me to this world. I had no purpose, and I certainly had no mission. It took the words of a man who had stage 4 cancer, literally dying as he was speaking them to me, in order for me to see the changes that I needed to make. He told me 2 very powerful things. 1, it's okay to take a knee in life, but you have to remember to get back up. And 2, nobody knows how long we have in this life, but we choose how we spend the time we're given. Understanding these lessons were literally the first steps towards my own healing. I share them with you in the hopes that it inspires you to look at steps in your own process that may help others. It began a chain reaction of positive influences in my life. I discovered my purpose was to help others share their stories. My mission was to create a safe place for veterans to debrief. I was to share stories of service, sacrifice, and transition with the civilian population that they serve. I'm no longer suicidal. I'm remarried to an amazing woman that's my better in every way. 3 years to the day from my first step onto the stage of advocacy, we're blessed with the birth of my daughter. She continues to grow like a wildfire. In December of last year, I stood up Veterans of War, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving and sharing veteran stories. In February, we got our 501c3 tax-exempt status from the IRS. Little steps, a little bit at a time. Soon, we'll launch Operation Enduring Homecoming, an initiative committed to telling the stories of the more than 6,800 fallen service brothers and sisters from the Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns. I can see a lifetime's worth of purpose ahead of me. I'd like to end this talk by reminding you that the veterans in your midst have made it through some very challenging situations. To a man or to a woman, their mettle has been tested, and they have come out of the crucible stronger for it. Our veterans are civic assets. Just as the greatest generation built much of our infrastructure, I challenge you to help this generation of returning veterans to do even more. We have an unprecedented ability to connect with one another and to grow through shared service. As we look to a new year and to a new world full of hope, I urge you to remember that there is always a price for peace, one that is paid voluntarily by your brothers and sisters every single day. We're still at war. 16 years later, we're still at war. We save and we tell their stories so that they may never die. Stories matter. They're a way to honor an event, a deed, or a hero, a way to remember those that have fallen, but more importantly, to remember the ideals and the beliefs that they stood for, to honor their sacrifice. Stories teach, stories inspire. Let's work to save your story together. I hope by sharing my story, I've inspired you to share yours as well. It's been my honor and pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you, and happy Veterans Day.